Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you.
Well, every year, my annual stewardship sermon is a time of great stress for everyone. Stress for me, because when you're in seminary, they don't tell you what it feels like to ask people to give money to God, but you're really getting them, your salary's coming from that. Kind of a conflict of interest, it seems to me. But also, you don't realize at the time that when I I love this church. I want this church to prosper and do well, all of that stuff. But that's never where my passion is, because when you come here, I don't know what's happened to you this week. I don't know if there's somebody who's thinking about suicide. I don't know if there's somebody whose marriage has collapsed. And if you've come here just trying to put your life together, and this is the Sunday I say, well, and give generously, give till it hurts. That may be the last thing somebody needs to hear. Plus, for me personally, after I've been bashing capitalism for 10 years, I can't say, well, capitalism is bad for every place but here. I know that there are many, many things that could not happen if it weren't for community. Some of us went to Washington this week to advocate for immigrants. And that happens, you didn't pay for it, by the way, but your generosity with my time is unbelievable. And I'm not able to communicate that with any other minister I know. This is, you're so incredibly generous and wanting me to spend time out in the real world with real problems. And I know that wouldn't happen without community. But it's still awkward. It's still awkward. So what I try to do each year to it's more like my own hang-ups and stuff and neuroses, trying to work through them. So I always take a passage that's given me trouble, a passage that I've heard televangelists say, and then looking for the gospel within that, looking for what is Jesus really going after. It's not a high steeple, I would hope. And this is the line, give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured in your lap. For the measure you use will be the measure, it will be measured to you. I've heard so many televangelists talk about, pressed down, shaken together. And I didn't even know what that meant most of the time. What is it? What are you talking about with that? We'll get back to that in a second. But here's the thing to remember, I believe, that Jesus is never talking directly about the church, because the church didn't exist when Jesus did. Right? The church is established later. That doesn't mean that the church can't be a great vessel for expressing this love that Jesus wants us to take out into the world. But it's never about us. That's a decision you have to make. If your response in gratitude and the sense of calling you feel that this is a good place to do that, that's wonderful for us. But Jesus isn't talking about the church. He's talking about life. He is talking about community. But the establishment of the church has not happened yet. But there are communities, and they make a huge difference in people's lives. And he's saying that this new life that he's talking about requires an intimate relationship with other human beings. So it's not just abstract. It's not something we can do just thinking about it. It's something we have to live out. So, what Jesus is saying, I believe here, is that there's a different kind of economy for life, for love, than there is for economics. What Jesus isn't saying is if you give to this church enough money, then your dandruff will go away. Although, who knows? Who knows? But you've heard the televangelist, God is growing hair. Jesus isn't talking about economics here. It includes economics. Life includes everything. Religion, economics, everything. But first we have to understand it at the depth that Jesus is talking about. And what he's saying is, you come from a depth that you can't even understand. Your life doesn't belong to you. Buddha taught this too. If your life belonged to you, you couldn't get sick and you wouldn't die. Right? Something is happening through you, but it doesn't belong to you. You can't control it. And so it's a mistake to live in your judgments about life. It's a mistake to think that what you desire and what you fear are your true life. Because your true life, what's happening through you, has a different kind of economy. Here's one of the huge problems with capitalism as a religion, and that's what it is in this country. Let's be blunt. You have, Catholic capitalists, Protestant Catholic capitalists. But you're taught to use religion to get the stuff, to get the blessings in many, many churches. But here's the problem with that. You're going to die. Spoiler alert. And we're not challenged in this culture and in the religion that's traditionally taught to fully absorb the fact that whatever money you make, you're going to lose because you're going to die. It's not really yours. So what has worth and value for an eternal being versus a little critter like us that comes and goes is very different. You've heard it before, but it's absolutely true. On people's deathbed, very few people say, I had the most stuff of anybody I know. Right? Very few people are thinking of that, of their second car, their second home. They want life. And we can live our whole lives and not appreciate what Jesus is talking about. The most valuable thing is life, and we don't own it. We don't control it. But we should have reverence for it as it comes through us and in us. The parables, the jolting teachings of Jesus are all ways where we leave our judgments about life and enter into life itself. I love this statement by Thoreau. He said, "Not until we are completely lost or turned around do we appreciate the vastness and strangeness of nature." Have you ever been on a trip and you're just kind of walking through it and you're living in your map? And you're just projecting on everything you see, and then you get lost. And nature takes a strangeness where the color of the leaves jump out at you, where the sounds of the water aren't fitting in your story anymore. And you're just struck by the strange mystery and majesty of everything that is around you. That is the wonderment we could live much of our life in. But we have to help each other do that. We have to set an appointment for that kind of wonder and spontaneity, which sounds like a contradiction, I understand. But if you don't make time for wonderment, you can get sucked along in life for years at a time before you stop to notice the miracle that your life is. So Jesus is saying the measure you use on other people is the same window that what you're looking for is going to be able to come through. For me, that's driving. When I'm driving and I see somebody cut in front of me and I have the prophetic message that this person deserves death. It's not me, but I have this prophetic certainty. And then 2 minutes later, I do the same thing to somebody else. Now, what do I do with that? It was Eric Hoffer that said, the strange thing is we really do love our neighbor as we love ourselves, and we hate our neighbor as we hate ourselves. We judge our neighbor as we judge ourselves. This is such a helpful thing to realize, that the mathematics we use for other people gets visited on ourselves, and the mathematics that we use on ourselves gets visited on other people. If you think you love other people and you hate yourself, ask them, right? It's very, very hard to love another person if you hate yourself. And it's very, very hard to love yourself if you're judging other people. There's a philosopher whose name I always have trouble with. He's Slavic. It's Slavoj. Anyway, he's a guy. Zizek, something like that. Zikek, I think. No, Zizek. He should get another name, I think. He says, think of the strangeness of today's situation. 30, 40 years ago, we were still debating about what the future will be. Communist, fascist, capitalist, whatever. Today, nobody even debates these issues. We all silently accept global capitalism is here to stay. On the other hand, we're obsessed with cosmic catastrophes, the whole earth disintegrating because of some virus, because of an asteroid hitting the earth, and such and so forth. So the paradox is that it's much easier to imagine the end of all life on earth than a much more modest, radical change in capitalism. It's strange. We are so propagandized to value property over life, to do our ethics based on property, and not feel it when people suffer, to not feel any kind of sense of obligation for somebody, to not get any kind of connection to the wars that take place when you value property over humanity. This is what is needed in the world. And the early church was made up of people who said yes to the calling, first of all, or not necessarily first, but to be a community of resistance to that evil, but also an oasis for the human heart. It's probably that has to come first. A place where you are accepted, you can heal. There are no bars to jump over to get in. But that ends with a love that does justice. What good is love that lets others suffer and says nothing? What good is that to a person being oppressed? I mean, we realize we've thought of ourselves as an inclusive church. But if you don't stand up for the persecuted, what good is that to them? So, Jesus says, you do not belong to yourself. Your life within you does not belong to you. It flows through you. And ultimately, it's what you give to others and comes back through relationship. And the strange thing is, the more you give, the more it multiplies. Not with money, but with life. But that includes money, it includes relationships. When you hear stories about these miracles of the fish turning into feeding the multitude, it's a myth, right? It was never just a magic trick that happened. But it's a principle that when we share life together, miraculously there's enough for everyone. change the human heart is much more of a miracle than to multiply fish. And what Jesus is saying in this passage, and it starts off about judgment, because he's talking about life and how we perceive it. But it's saying that when we are generous in living, we get our needs fulfilled, our emotional needs. He said it's pressed down, shaken together. Have you ever bought a box of cereal and it was half full or half empty, depending on how you're looking at it? And then it says some settling is natural. So why didn't you do that at the factory and give me a whole box of cereal? Right? What it's saying is, just metaphorically, that they shake the box until the settling takes place, then they put more in until it's full and settled, and then it spills over. In other words, it's a fair deal. A lot of times we think love has cheated us, but usually it wasn't love, it was desire. Right? We wanted somebody to be something or to do something. We didn't actually love that person for themselves. The spirit with which we give is more important than the amount that we give by a landslide. When it's coming from your heart, even if it's very small to you, it feels different to the person that you're giving it to. And the truth is, love needs a footprint on the earth. That's where a community can be so helpful in the life of love. A place where your heart can heal, but also a place where we can begin to practice the kind of love that the world most needs. Much of that gospel died in the traditional church. And it was the black churches that remembered. It was the Catholic churches in South America and Central America, the liberation churches in South Africa. There's a great thinker, if you've never read her, named Bell Hooks. She's a remarkable human being. She says this: one of the most vital ways we sustain ourselves is by building communities of resistance, places where we know we are not alone. She says the dominator culture has tried to keep us all afraid. You know, you watch the news these days and it injures your heart. The brutality of our president, the inhumanity that pulses out of that building on a daily basis injures your human heart. This can be an oasis for us. She says, dominator culture has tried to keep us all afraid, to make us choose safety instead of risk, sameness instead of diversity. Moving through that fear, finding out what connects us, reveling in our differences. This is the process that brings us closer, that gives us a world of shared values, of meaningful community. And finally, she says this: to build community requires vigilant awareness of the work we must continually do to undermine all the socialization that leads us to behave in ways that perpetuate domination. Think how much you've been taught that the worthwhile person is a dominator. When you were in first grade and they had that spelling bee, and they told you to forget about your relationships with the other children. You were to succeed. And that trophy would be worth more to you than your friends. Do you know there are cultures where the American teachers go overseas and the kids won't, they'll lie and give the wrong answer to a test so they don't embarrass their friends? Competition is not the only way. It's not even a human way for a heart. When Jesus looked out at the world that he lived in, which wasn't so different these days, he called the people, and the ones that heard were the rejected, the people who've been enslaved, the powerful, intelligent women who couldn't find any place to plug in the culture, the poor, the sick, the disabled. These were the ones that understood their own true human worth. And so Jesus told them a message to take out into the world. And he called it good news. It was the word that's used for when a country has won a war or some wonderful thing has happened. And the message was, you are not to be judged by those standards anymore. Your worth is beyond measure. And so if someone has told you that you are not enough, you can stop listening to them now. Roseanne Cash. Yeah, Roseanne Barr has been written out of that shows you my social awareness. This is Roseanne Cash. When I was 11, I stopped dreaming the dreams that didn't come true. I stopped talking to people who didn't listen. I lost hope and retreated. I assumed that the root of the problem was that I was too strange for the real world. That being the case, I created a charming and dynamic personality to make the necessary forays into the outside. And I kept my strangeness for myself, my own peculiar jewels under lock and key. That's what I care about. I care about the human heart. But this is a message that does call us to community. It does call us to care for one another and to explore if this is the place where you can express a part of that calling. Close with the words by Bishop Tutu. We are living in a historical moment. We are each called to take part in a great transformation. Our survival as a species is threatened by global warming, economic meltdown, and an ever-increasing gap between rich and poor. Yet these threats offer an opportunity to awaken as an interconnected and beloved community. And this has been the call all along, to become a community of resistance, but also an oasis for the human heart. I invite you now to your own reflection on these words.